Good evening, students. Welcome to Biology Form 5. This is Sundrram here, and today we are going to continue with coordination and response. In the previous video, we have covered a general explanation of coordination, and we have also explained about peripheral nervous system and also central nervous system. In today's video, we are going to cover the first component of the central nervous system, which is the brain. So what are the components of the brain and what are the functions of each component will be explained in today's video. Let's go. The central nervous system consists of brain, which is located here, and the brain is fully protected by a bony structure known as cranium. Extending ventrally or extending downward from the brain is the spinal cord. So this is the spinal cord, which is fully protected by vertebral column. If you are lucky enough to see the actual central nervous system, this is how it's supposed to look like. It has almost like an alien kind of appearance, but what you see here, this is the brain, and extending downward from the brain is the spinal cord. All of these structures that is extending outward from the spinal cord are the spinal nerves, which we already explained in the previous video. And to start the brain explanation, to explain the components of the brain, we'll start with Dr. House here. And he has a gentle reminder to all of you, which is if you have a brain, make sure you use it. A gentle reminder because many have forgotten that they have one. If we do cross section of the brain, we can generally divide the brain into two regions. The first one is known as gray matter. So this is the gray matter, basically the outer region, and it's quite clear from this cross section that the outer region is highly folded, and by being folded it can increase the surface area to place more neurons so that there can be more connection between the neurons and the thinking capacity of the brain increases. The inner region of the brain, all of this area is known as the white matter. So this is one way to classify the brain based on the outer region and also the inner region. But what's more important is the functional components of the brain. So if you were to explain in terms of functional structures of the brain, the components of the brain, quite clear in this diagram that this part here is the largest part of the brain, and again you can clearly see all the foldings to increase the surface area. For mammals, generally for animals, this is the largest part of the brain. For mammals, it's much larger compared to other animals, and this is where this area is known as the cerebellum, and this is where all the mental activities are done. So example of mental activities is such as thinking, understanding, memorizing, learning, calculating will all come under mental activities. Other functions controlled by the cerebellum is example of singing and also
blah 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 blah.
I get the idea, talking. Okay, so all of that comes under mental activity. So besides mental activity, cerebellum also controls something known as voluntary action. Voluntary action are action that can be controlled consciously. Basically, it means you can decide whether you want to do or don't want to do the action. For example, in a classroom setting, you know there are certain rules that you have to follow. Example, you're not supposed to talk when the teacher is talking, or you're not supposed to use handphone when the teacher is teaching in front. If you don't follow this rule, let's see what happens.
No.
So that should be a reminder to follow the rules in class. That student had a choice of using or not using the handphone. He voluntarily decided to use, and that was the consequence. So cerebellum controls mental activities and all voluntary actions of the body. It is also the largest component of the brain. So this is the cerebellum. The next component that we need to explain is cerebellum, which is more or less located behind the cerebellum. So this is where it's located. and its main function is muscular coordination. Cerebellum controls body posture and balance to ensure we don't fall down. For example, in this next video, we are going to see Indian superstar Rajinikanth walking stylishly. So what you should realize is, as he's walking, every time he's putting his right foot forward or right leg forward, the left hand automatically moves forward. So this is what we call as balancing, and is fully controlled by cerebellum. If let's say you try, sure you'll feel awkward. That's because the body is not balanced. Another example of cerebellum action, what we mean by body balancing, is shown in this video, in which we have this human trying to walk across this canyon on a tightrope. So as he's walking across, his body is balanced by using both of his hands and also part of his body. So again, all of this action is fully controlled by cerebellum. The third component of the brain after cerebellum and cerebellum is medulla oblongata, which is located in this region. If cerebellum controls all voluntary action, medulla oblongata controls all involuntary action. Involuntary actions are actions that cannot be controlled by body consciously. Easy example is as you swallow the food, in the esophagus we have a process known as peristalsis. Peristalsis is an involuntary action. Heartbeat is an involuntary action. Breathing also comes under involuntary action. So that's basically it. Even though the brain has many other components, for SPM syllabus, you need to know cerebrum, cerebellum, and also medulla oblongata. So as summary, the largest part of the brain, which is located here, is the cerebrum, and cerebrum is part of the forebrain. Behind here we have the cerebellum, which is part of the hindbrain, and this area contains the midbrain. The midbrain contains medulla oblongata and pons. For the moment, the function of pons is not needed. Below medulla oblongata is here we have spinal cord. We finish our explanation with a nice summary video by BBC News.
This is the right hemisphere of a human brain, one of hundreds of brains donated for medical research in the UK every year to one of 10 brain banks. Now, if I pick it up, intact, the human brain weighs around 3 pounds or 1.5 kilos. It makes up just 2% of the body's weight and yet consumes 20% of the body's energy. It contains 100 billion nerve cells or neurons. Each neuron has 10,000 connections, making a brain network of 1,000 trillion connections. Now that's more complex than any supercomputer, and yet the brain has an electrical output of just 20 watts, enough to power a very dim light bulb. You can see just how delicate and fragile it is. I'll just point out a couple of features. This is the frontal lobe, the command and control center of the brain, while this projection down here is the temporal lobe, involved in language, emotion, and memory.
And that's it. Okay, so we are done. We are at the ending of this video, and we'll see you again in the next. Bye bye.